The flowers were still fresh, the dress was still on, the chairs were still full of people who had driven hours to watch me become someone's wife, and he was already gone, not late, not stuck in traffic. Gone, his phone went straight to voicemail, his groomsman looked at the floor, his mother would not meet my eyes. I had spent 14 months planning every detail of that day, and in less than 20 minutes, I went from a bride to a woman standing alone in a hallway that smelled like roses and broken promises. That was the moment I thought my life was ending. I did not know yet that it was only beginning. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something honest. If the person you trusted most, the one you built a future with, the one you defended to your family, the one you gave the best years of your planning and hoping to, if that person left you alone at the most visible moment of your life, what would you do next? Would you fall apart? Would you rage? Would you go quiet and disappear? Stay with me because what Nadia did next is not what anyone expected. And it started with 4 words from a man she almost did not invite. My name is Nadia. I am 31 years old. I work in commercial real estate development, and until about 14 months ago, I believed that love was something you earned by being steady, patient, and good. I believed that if you showed up fully for someone, they would eventually show up for you. I believed that loyalty was a language everyone spoke, even if some people were just slower at it than others. I was wrong about most of that. But I did not find out how wrong I was in a quiet, private moment. I found out in a banquet hall in front of 217 people, with a photographer still circling the room and a 4-tier cake sitting on a table in the corner that nobody would ever cut. Let me take you back a little, because the day itself only makes sense when you understand the years that came before it. I met Daniel when I was 26. He was charming in the way that some people are charming, not loud about it, not flashy, just quietly confident. He knew what to say in any room, he laughed easily, he remembered small details. On our third date, he noticed I had mentioned in passing that I liked a very specific kind of almond tea that only one shop in the city carried, and he showed up with 2 cups of it without ever making a big deal about remembering. I thought that was love. Looking back, I think it was technique. I think Daniel was very good at making people feel seen just long enough to earn their trust. We dated for 3 years before he proposed. Those 3 years were not without problems. Daniel had a habit of pulling away when things got serious. He would go quiet for days, then come back warm and attentive, and I would tell myself the distance was just his personality. He had grown up in a family that did not talk about feelings openly. His father was the kind of man who showed love through problem solving, not words. Daniel had adopted that same emotional shorthand. I made excuses for it regularly. My closest friend Priya told me once, during a late-night conversation over takeout, that she was not sure Daniel was as invested in me as I was in him. I told her she was reading too much into things. I was good at doing that, telling myself that the people who loved me were wrong and the person who sometimes made me feel invisible was right. The proposal happened on a Tuesday, not a special Tuesday. We were at home making dinner and Daniel just came out of the bedroom with a ring box and said he had been thinking and he wanted to make things official. No grand gesture, no speech, just a quiet, practical offer of permanence. I said yes immediately. I was happy. I told myself the simplicity was romantic, that it was us, no performance, just real. Priya looked at the ring photo I sent her and wrote back, "That is beautiful," and then after a pause she wrote, "Are you happy?" I said yes. I was. Or I was close enough to happy that I could not tell the difference at the time. We set the date for the following spring, 14 months away. That gave us time to save properly, plan carefully, and do everything the way I had always imagined. I am someone who pours herself into things. When I care about something, I research it, organize it, plan for every variable. I found the venue. I chose the flowers, ivory garden roses, and eucalyptus, simple and clean. I found the photographer, a woman named Celeste who specialized in documentary-style photos that looked like real moments instead of poses. I chose the menu after 3 tastings. I found the dress after visiting 6 boutiques and trying on 22 different styles. I did almost all of this alone or with Priya because Daniel said he trusted my taste and did not want to get involved in the details. At the time, I read that as respect for my vision. I understand now that it was disengagement. A man who is fully present for the life he is building does not outsource its most meaningful moments to someone else and call it a compliment. Daniel's contribution to the wedding was choosing his groomsmen, his 3 friends from college, and showing up to the suit fitting. That was essentially it. When I would share updates with him, he would nod and say it sounded great. When I would show him photos of table settings or ask whether he preferred one arrangement over another, he would say, "Whatever you want, it all looks the same to me." I kept interpreting that as easygoing. I kept telling myself some people just express excitement differently. 6 months before the wedding, something shifted in Daniel's energy that I could not quite name. He started working late more often. He became more distracted when we were home together. He began responding to texts and calls that he would step out of the room to take. When I asked if anything was wrong, he said work was stressful. When I pushed a little, he said I worried too much. I had heard that before. I backed off. 4 months before the wedding, I met my boss, Marcus Hale, for the first time in a more personal capacity. I had worked at Hale Development Group for 2 years, and Marcus was the kind of executive presence that filled a room without trying. He was in his late 40s, focused, precise, and deeply fair in a way that I had not often experienced from people in his position. He did not take credit for his team's work. He asked questions and listened to the actual answers. He remembered what people told him. He had built his company from a single property acquisition into a mid-sized development firm that handled major commercial contracts across 4 states, and he had done it without the kind of ruthlessness that usually comes with that kind of growth. I respected him enormously. I liked working for him. That was the full extent of my feelings about Marcus at that point in my life. The shift came at a company event in January, about 4 months before my wedding date. It was an annual dinner that Marcus hosted for the full team, formal but warm. Daniel had been invited as my plus one. He canceled the night before, saying he was not feeling well. I went alone. I sat at a table with 2 colleagues and spent the evening making small talk and feeling the particular loneliness of being surrounded by people while missing the one person who was supposed to be beside you. At the end of the evening, Marcus found me near the coat check. He said, "I noticed Daniel did not make it." I said he was not feeling well. Marcus looked at me for a moment, not long, not intrusive, just a second, and said, "I hope everything is okay." There was something in the way he said it that made me feel he was asking about more than Daniel's health, but I did not follow that thread. I thanked him and went home. In February, 2 months before the wedding, I found a receipt. I was not snooping. I was clearing old charging cables from the console of Daniel's car because we were about to make a long drive and he had asked me to tidy up while he went back inside to grab something. The receipt was folded inside a small compartment near the gear shift. It was for a restaurant I had never heard of, dated on a Thursday evening in January, a Thursday I remembered because it was the same evening I had texted Daniel asking if he wanted to have dinner and he had said he was working late. The receipt was for 2 people. The total was not small. There was a line item for a shared dessert. I stared at it for a moment. I folded it back the way I found it. I did not say anything. Daniel came back to the car and we drove 4 hours to visit his family, and I sat in the passenger seat for 4 hours with that receipt folded inside my own jacket pocket, trying to decide what I knew and what I only suspected. I never confronted him about it directly. I told myself I was waiting for more context. I was really waiting because I was afraid of what the context might be. I had spent 3 years building a life with this man. I had a venue booked. I had a dress fitted. I had invitations sent to 217 people. I had a plan, and the plan did not include discovering that the person I was marrying might be someone I did not fully know. I told Priya about the receipt over the phone. She went very quiet. Then she said, "Nadia, you have to ask him." I said I would. I did not. Instead, I went back to seating arrangements and final headcounts and all the mechanical tasks of planning that kept me moving forward when staying still would have required thinking. In March, 1 month before the wedding, I found something worse than a receipt. I found a message. Daniel left his phone on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower one morning, and a notification appeared on the screen. I was not trying to read it, it appeared. The name was just an initial, K, and the message preview was 4 words. Long, it said, "Last night was everything." I stood in the kitchen for a full minute without moving. I heard the shower running. I heard the neighbor's car start outside. I heard my own breathing, which had gone very shallow and careful. When Daniel came out, I handed him his phone screen up. He glanced at it and something moved across his face, not guilt exactly, more like a very fast calculation, and then he said it was a colleague sending a recap of a client meeting. He said people in his industry used personal numbers for everything. He said Kay was a woman on his team named Kura who had a habit of being dramatic in texts. He said he should have mentioned her before, but it never seemed important. He said I was reading too much into it. He said I worried too much. I wanted to believe him. I did not fully believe him, but I wanted to. And wanting was enough for me to keep going, to keep planning, to keep making payments to the venue and finalize the flower order and confirm the rehearsal dinner booking. I kept going because stopping would mean admitting that I had spent years building something on ground that was softer than I had ever allowed myself to check. The week before the wedding, Daniel seemed lighter, more present. He was attentive and warm and said things that reminded me of the man I had fallen for in the first place. He said he could not wait to start this next chapter with me. He said I had built something beautiful for both of them and he was grateful. I held on to those words. I arranged them carefully in my memory like furniture in a room I was not ready to leave. The morning of the wedding, I woke up at 5:30. I could not sleep. I had that particular quiet excitement of a day you have been imagining for over a year. Priya arrived at 7 to help me get ready. My mother came at 8. My younger sister Layla arrived with coffee and spent the first hour crying in a good way, saying I looked like everything she had hoped for me. I remember sitting in the hotel room in my dress with Priya doing the last pin in my hair and thinking, this is the day. This is the day all of it becomes real. I felt full. I felt finally arrived. I had no idea that in less than 5 hours, the floor would fall out from under me. At 10:15, I received a text from Daniel's groomsman, a man named Brett, whom I had always found slightly uneasy to be around without ever being able to explain why. The text said, "Nadia, Daniel asked me to reach out. He's not coming. I'm really sorry." I read it 3 times. I read it the way you read something in a foreign language, going over it again and again, hoping the meaning will shift into something you recognize. He is not coming. My brain kept stopping at those 3 words. The ceremony was scheduled for 1 o'clock. It was 10:15 in the morning. There were 217 people who had already traveled, already checked into hotels, already gotten dressed, and were beginning to make their way to a banquet hall decorated with ivory roses. My photographer was already setting up. The officiant had already arrived. The cake was being delivered, and Daniel was not coming. I called his phone. It went to voicemail on the first ring. I called again. Voicemail. I texted Brett back. Where is he? What happened? Is he okay? Brett replied. He said he needed to be honest with you. He said he was sorry. He said he hopes you understand. I sat down on the edge of the hotel bed in my wedding dress and I did not cry. I want to be honest about that. I did not cry immediately. I went very still. I think the human body, when it absorbs a shock of a certain size, simply pauses everything that is not essential. I sat there in the dress and the flowers and the carefully arranged room and I went completely quiet inside. Priya was the first to understand what had happened. She read my face. She sat down beside me and took my hand without saying anything for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me what you need." I said I did not know yet. I said I needed a minute. She nodded and she held my hand and did not fill the silence with noise, which was exactly the right thing to do. My mother came in about 2 minutes later and I had to tell her. Her face did something I had never seen it do before. It went through grief and fury at the same time in the same second, and then it settled into something hard and protective. She said his name once in a voice I did not recognize, and then she said, "What do you need from me right now?" I said I needed everyone to stay calm because there were 217 people downstairs, and someone had to figure out how to handle this. That is where my brain went, not to heartbreak immediately, not to the years of excuses I had made, not to the receipt or the message from Kay or all the signs I had chosen not to see. My brain went straight to the practical problem because I think sometimes when the emotional pain is too large to touch, the mind finds the nearest task and locks onto it like a lifeline. I sent Brett one more message. I said, "Tell Daniel that I am not going to chase him. Tell him to do what he needs to do, and tell him I want a clear explanation when the dust settles, not another text through a middleman." Brett did not reply to that ones. At 11 o'clock, there was a knock at the hotel room door. Priya answered it. Standing in the hallway, still in his suit from what I would later learn was a breakfast meeting that had gone long, was Marcus. He had his phone in his hand and he looked at me with the kind of directness that does not require preamble. He said, "I just heard. Are you all right?" I said I did not know yet. He said that was a fair answer. And then he said 4 words. He leaned in very slightly, not invading space, just making sure I heard clearly, and he said, "You do not fall." That was it, "You do not fall." He said it with the certainty of someone describing something he had already decided was true. He did not explain it. He did not make it dramatic. He just said it the way you might say the sky is blue or the building is still standing. And something inside me, something that had been tipping toward collapse since 10:15 that morning, caught. I do not want to overwrite that moment. I am not telling you Marcus swooped in and fixed anything. He did not, but there is something extraordinary about being told with absolute confidence by someone you deeply respect that you are the kind of person who does not fall, not that you will be okay eventually, not that it will hurt but you will survive, just you do not fall. It was the most efficient, most effective thing anyone said to me that entire day. We stood in the hallway together for a few minutes. Marcus told me he had arrived early specifically to find me because a colleague at the venue had recognized me and sent him a message. He said he had come directly. He said whatever I decided to do in the next few hours, he was there if I needed him. I said I needed to figure out what to tell the guests. He nodded and said he could help with that if I wanted. I said yes. What happened next is something I am still slightly proud of, even though parts of it hurt to remember. I did not hide in the hotel room. I did not ask everyone to leave. I got up in the dress with the flowers still on the table with the photographer somewhere downstairs not yet knowing her entire plan had changed, and I went down to the banquet hall. I asked the venue coordinator to gather everyone who needed to know. I asked Priya to stay close. I asked my mother to take my sister and my aunt to a quiet corner because I needed them calm, not performing. And then I walked into the banquet hall in front of 217 people who had come to see me get married, and I told them the truth. Not all of it, not the receipt, not the message, not the 3 years of slowly accumulating signs. I simply said that Daniel had made the decision not to come, that the wedding would not be happening today, and that I was sorry for the disruption to their travel and their day. I thanked them for being there. I told them the food was paid for and the venue was ours until 6, and I hoped they would stay and eat and let this be a gathering of people who cared about each other, even if the reason for gathering had changed. I said it without crying. I said it without anger. I said it with my chin level and my voice steady and my hands not shaking, which surprised even me. The room was completely silent for about 4 seconds. And then someone began to clap. I am not sure who started it. I think it might have been my uncle, who is the kind of man who expresses every emotion through applause, and then more people joined, and the sound of it moved through the room and landed on me somewhere between comfort and unbearable sadness. I spent the next hour accepting condolences and reassuring people who were more distressed than I was allowing myself to be. Marcus stayed nearby but not intrusively. He refilled his coffee twice. He talked to my father for a long time. He helped my mother explain to older relatives who did not understand what had happened. He did not make a scene of being there. He was just there quietly, which turned out to be the most useful thing anyone did that day. At 2 in the afternoon, I finally sat down. The banquet hall had found its rhythm. People were eating, talking softly. The photographer had put away her camera and was quietly helping herself to a meal, and I sat in a chair near the window and allowed myself to feel for the first time the full weight of the morning. Priya sat across from me. She did not say I told you so. She did not say she was not surprised. She held her glass and looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" I said I did not know yet. She said, "That is okay, you have time." I did not hear from Daniel that day. I did not hear from him the next day either, on the tea. Here, day after the wedding that never happened, I received a message, not a call, a message, that said he was sorry, that he had been struggling with doubts for a long time, that he had made a terrible decision in how he handled it, but that he hoped I could understand he had done what he needed to do for his own well-being. He said he would understand if I was angry. He said he hoped eventually I could see it was better this way. He did not mention Kura. He did not mention the receipt or the late nights or the 4 months of pulling away. He presented the whole thing as a private crisis of confidence, as though I were a business deal he had gotten cold feet on, rather than a person he had spent 3 years building a life with. I read the message twice and put my phone down and went to work. That is what I did. I went to work because it was a Tuesday and I had a project review at 9 and a client call at 11, and the world does not stop spinning because someone decided your feelings were less important than their comfort. In the weeks that followed, I learned not from Daniel but from Priya, who learned from a mutual friend that Daniel had been involved with Kura for nearly 8 months before the wedding. 8 months. That meant that while I was choosing flowers and tasting menus and standing in bridal boutiques imagining a future, he was in the middle of another relationship entirely. The dinner receipt made sense now. The messages made sense. The 4 months of distance made sense. And the worst of it was not even the betrayal itself. The worst of it was the sheer amount of my time, my planning, my emotional investment, my hope, that he had allowed to continue while knowing what he was doing. I did not call him. I did not send a long message cataloging every moment where he could have stopped things and chose not to. I did not show up at his door. I simply allowed the silence to be what it was, a verdict, and I kept going. About 3 weeks after the wedding, something happened at work that I did not expect. Marcus called me into his office, not for a project review. He closed the door and sat down and said he wanted to talk to me about something that was separate from work. He said he had been watching how I handled the past few weeks, and he wanted me to know that the way I had carried myself, not just on the day itself, but in everything since, had been one of the most impressive things he had witnessed in a long time. He said he did not say that lightly. He said he had been through his own version of a moment where everything fell apart publicly, and he had not handled it with anywhere near as much grace. I did not know what to do with that. I said thank you and I meant it, but I also felt like I had not done anything particularly impressive. I had just kept moving because the alternative was collapsing, and collapsing had not seemed useful. Marcus looked at me and said, "That is exactly what I mean." He then said he wanted to offer me something that had been in discussion for a while but that he had been waiting to raise at the right time. He said he was expanding the firm's development operations into a new regional division, and he wanted me to lead it, not assist with it, lead it, my own team, my own projects, my own budget authorization. He said I had the skill set and the judgment, and he had been watching both for 2 years. He said if I was interested, the conversation could start whenever I was ready. I was 31 years old, 3 weeks out of a catastrophically public non-wedding, and my boss was offering me a division leadership position. I stared at him for a moment and then I said, "I am ready now." He smiled and said he had expected that answer. That conversation changed the shape of the next 6 months of my life. I poured everything into it: the grief, the anger I was still not fully processing, the energy that had previously gone into planning a future with someone who had been building a different future without me. I put it all into work, not in a self-destructive way, in a focused, intentional way. I built the division from the ground up. I hired 4 people. I managed 2 major project bids in the first quarter, and we won both. I worked long hours, but not because I was running from something, because I had found something I was actually running toward. During those months, Marcus and I worked closely together. The professional proximity became a kind of friendship, careful at first, given the obvious fact that I was still processing what had happened with Daniel, and given that Marcus was my employer, and given that neither of us were people who moved quickly toward things we had not thought through. But it was real. We had dinner twice, once to discuss a project that ran late, and once because we had both had a hard week and it seemed like the natural thing to do. We talked about work, about the company's direction, about the kind of people we wanted to be. In our industry, we talked about his daughter, who was 12 and apparently very opinionated about everything. We talked about what had gone wrong in his own marriage years earlier, which he described with more honesty than most people bring to comfortable dinner table conversation. I did not label what was growing between us. I was not ready to label anything. And Marcus, to his credit, never applied pressure. He moved at the pace that made sense, and I appreciated that more than I knew how to say. 6 months after the wedding, Daniel contacted me again. He had apparently broken things off with Kura. The relationship had lasted 3 months past the wedding he had destroyed, and then it had ended sourly from what I eventually pieced together. He sent a message asking if we could meet. He said he had a lot of things to say that he should have said before. He said he missed me. He said he had made the worst mistake of his life. He used the word soulmate. He actually used the word soulmate, which told me a great deal about how thoroughly he had misunderstood who I had become in the 6 months since he left. I sat with that message for 2 days. I did not respond immediately, not because I was considering reconciliation, I was not, but because I wanted to think carefully about what I was going to say, and I wanted to say it only once. On the third day, I called him. He answered on the first ring, which suggested he had been waiting. I told him I was glad he had found the clarity to reach out. I told him I wanted him to know that I did not carry anger about what had happened, because anger would have required me to keep him in my emotional life, and I had used the past 6 months to build something that left very little room for that. I told him I hoped he was doing well. And then I told him I did not want to meet, not because I was punishing him, but because there was nothing useful in that meeting for either of us. He had the life he had chosen. I had the life I was building. Neither of those things required each other. He went quiet on the line, then he said, "You have moved on already?" I said, "I have moved forward, that is different." He asked what the difference was. I said, "Moving on implies leaving something behind. Moving forward means deciding where I am going." He did not have much to say after that. What I did not tell Daniel on that phone call, because it was none of his business, was that 3 weeks earlier, Marcus had asked me to dinner and made it clear, quietly and without pressure, that his interest in me had grown beyond professional friendship. He said he understood the timing was complicated. He said he was not asking me to decide anything in that moment. He said he simply wanted to be honest, because he was a person who had learned the hard way that not being honest was the most expensive habit a person could have. I looked at him across the dinner table, and I thought about all the times I had sat across from Daniel and excused what I felt because I did not want to rock the boat. I thought about the receipt I had hidden in my own pocket. I thought about the message from Kay that I had accepted a flimsy explanation for. I thought about how much of myself I had quietly erased in the service of keeping a relationship that was never fully mine to keep. And then I said to Marcus, "I appreciate that you told me directly." We took it slowly, very slowly. I was not ready to trust quickly, and I told him that plainly. He said he was not in a hurry, which was either the most reassuring or the most suspicious thing a person could say, and I watched carefully for which one it was. Over the next few months, it became clear it was the former. Marcus was not performing patience. He simply had it. He asked questions and waited for real answers. He noticed things. He did not make me feel like a project to be fixed or a wound to be healed. He made me feel like a person he found genuinely interesting, which turned out to be exactly what I needed and had never thought to ask for. 8 months after the wedding that did not happen, I went with Marcus to a firm event, this time as his guest, not his employee, though both things were still true, and I stood in the same kind of room where I had once sat alone missing Daniel, and I did not feel lonely at all. I felt, for the first time in what seemed like years, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The situation with Daniel did not stay clean and quiet forever. Life rarely allows that. About 9 months after the wedding, a situation arose that forced a more complicated reckoning. The venue, which I had booked under my name and paid for almost entirely from my own savings, because the original deal was that Daniel would cover the catering and I would cover the venue and all other costs, had never properly processed the cancellation credit. I had paid $6,200 for the venue booking, non-refundable per the contract, but there was a credit clause for events that were canceled more than 30 days in advance due to circumstances outside the client's control. The venue manager had, in a moment of genuine human decency on the day itself, quietly noted in the file that the cancellation was the result of an unexpected circumstance on the groom's side. This notation, which I had not known about at the time, made me technically eligible for a partial credit of $3,800. When I discovered this months later, in a follow-up email the venue sent about updating their records, I also discovered that Daniel had already called the venue without my knowledge, without my permission, and attempted to claim the credit himself. He had called 2 days after the wedding while I was still in the raw fog of everything, and told them he was the primary contact and wanted to know how to process the credit refund. The venue, fortunately, had looked at the original booking contract, which was in my name only. They had told him they could not process anything without the original contract holder's approval. He had pushed, they had held, and then they had flagged the whole file and sent me that follow-up email. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The man who abandoned me at the altar, not quietly, not privately, but in front of 217 people, had called the venue 2 days later to try to claim a credit on a booking I had paid for with my own money. He had not apologized yet, he had not explained. He had sent one middleman text about not coming, and his next move was to try to recoup money from a booking he had contributed nothing to. I was not surprised exactly, but I was clarified. That single act told me more about who Daniel really was than any receipt or message preview ever had. It told me that even in the wreckage of what he had done, his first instinct was to look for what he could still get. It told me that the person I had spent 3 years making excuses for had never once looked at our relationship and seen it as something he owed care to. He had seen it as something he could draw from. I called the venue and confirmed my eligibility for the credit. I provided the contract. I provided my payment records. The credit was processed within 2 weeks. I received $3,800 back into the account I had drained, saving for a wedding that never happened. I also sent Daniel a brief written message, not a long one, not an emotional one, informing him that I was aware of his attempt to claim the venue credit, that I had handled the matter directly with the venue as the original contract holder, and that I wanted to be very clear. Anything related to the wedding was in my name, paid with my money, and completely outside his reach. I did not insult him. I did not threat anything. I simply drew a line in precise, calm language and told him it was there. He did not respond for 4 days. When he did, he said he had just been trying to help handle things since I seemed overwhelmed. I did not dignify that with a reply. But the story was not finished yet. Daniel, I would learn, had talked to several mutual friends about the wedding with a version of events that reframed what happened. In his version, he had been dealing with serious personal struggles and had made a difficult but necessary decision. In his version, the relationship had been strained for a long time and both of them had known it was not working. In his version, walking out was not abandonment, it was honesty. He positioned himself not as someone who had run from his responsibilities, but as someone who had finally been brave enough to tell the truth. I heard about this version through Priya, who heard it from 2 different people in the same week, which meant it was circulating widely enough to have become the accepted narrative in certain circles. I thought about responding to it. I thought about calling people and correcting the record. I thought about posting something, saying something, doing something that would make the truth louder than the story he was telling. And then I decided not to, not because the truth did not matter, but because the people who mattered already knew it. My family knew what had happened. Priya knew. The people who had been in that room knew that I had stood up in my dress and addressed 217 guests with composure and honesty and grace. The people who worked with me knew the kind of person I had been in the months since. Marcus knew. The people whose opinion I actually valued had all the information they needed. I was not going to run a public campaign to dismantle Daniel's narrative. I was not going to spend my energy convincing mutual acquaintances that I was the wronged party. Let them think what they wanted. The story I was building with my own life would say more than anything I could announce. About 11 months after the wedding, something happened that brought Daniel back into my orbit in the most specific and unwelcome way possible. One of his college friends, one of the groomsmen who had been in the room that day, worked for a firm that was bidding on the same commercial development project my division was pursuing. It was a significant project, a mixed-use development on a formerly industrial site near the waterfront, and our bid was strong. We had done the research, run the numbers, prepared a genuinely excellent proposal. I had led the team personally. The groomsman's name was Ethan. I had met him half a dozen times over the years and always found him polished in the way of someone who has been taught to be polished, which is not the same as having genuine warmth. He was smart, well-connected, and had clearly moved up quickly at his firm. When I learned he was part of the competing bid team, I felt the very specific tension of a professional situation that has been made personal by someone else's history with you. I did not let it change how I worked. I submitted the best bid I could build, and I let the work speak for itself. 3 weeks into the evaluation period, I received a call from Ethan, not an email, a call. He said he was reaching out personally because he thought there might be an opportunity for the two firms to discuss a potential collaboration rather than direct competition. He said he admired what I had built in the past year. He said Daniel had always spoken highly of my professional abilities. He said it in a way that felt designed to soften me, to make me feel flattered by the reference, to use a personal connection to create professional advantage. I let him finish speaking. Then I said, I appreciate the outreach. If your firm wants to make a formal proposal for joint bidding, please send it in writing to our business development contact, whose information is on the firm website. I told him I was happy to have that conversation through proper channels. I told him I did not mix personal history with professional decision-making, and I wished him well with the bid. He paused for a moment and then said he understood and he would be in touch through the proper channel. He never was. I assume whatever advantage he had hoped to gain by calling me personally did not materialize, and the formal route did not seem worth the effort once the personal route was closed. Our bid was selected. The project award was announced at a development conference that I attended with 2 members of my team and Marcus. When the name of our firm was read out, Marcus shook my hand. My team lead, a sharp young woman named Tessa who had been with me since the early days of building the division, actually made a small, quiet sound that she quickly covered by coughing. I stood there in a conference room full of developers and city planners and financiers, and I felt something land in me that I did not have a precise word for. It was not just pride, it was more like recognition. Like something I had always known about myself had finally been confirmed by the world around me. We celebrated quietly, a team dinner at a restaurant that did not have white tablecloths or flower centerpieces because I had spent enough time in careful decorated rooms to last me a while. We ate and talked and raised glasses, and I looked around at the people I had chosen to build with, the people who had shown up and worked hard and believed in what we were creating, and I thought, this is what I was supposed to find. Not a perfect wedding, not a man who would eventually choose me. This. A life I had actually built with my own hands, with people who deserved my loyalty and returned it without being asked. The last time I saw Daniel in person was at a mutual friend's birthday gathering about a year after the wedding. I had known he might be there and decided not to arrange my social life around avoiding him. He looked well. He was with someone new, not Kura, someone different. When our eyes met across the room, he did a thing that people do when they are trying to look like they're not nervous about something they're deeply nervous about. He smiled too wide and then looked away too quickly. I nodded at him once and continued the conversation I was in. He came over to say hello about an hour later. He said it was good to see me. He said I looked great. He said it sounded like things were going really well for me professionally and he was glad. He said all the right things in the wrong order in the slightly stilted way of someone reciting a script they have rehearsed in the mirror. I said it was nice to see him too. I asked about his new project, something I had heard he was working on through work contacts. He brightened a little and started talking about it. I listened. I was polite and warm and completely present. And then when the conversation found its natural end, I said take care of yourself and I walked back to the other side of the room. Priya found me later and said, how was that? I said, surprise. Inglai fine, she said, you really are okay. I said, I really am. She said, I am so proud of you. I said, I am kind of proud of me too. I will not pretend the journey from that hotel room in the wedding dress to this version of myself was linear or easy. There were nights in the first few months where the loneliness was so specific and heavy that I had to sit with it deliberately rather than push it away, because I had learned by then that feelings do not shrink when you ignore them, they only become more insistent. There were moments where I wondered whether I had missed something I could have fixed, whether I had been less attentive than I should have been, whether there was a version of those 3 years where I had paid different attention and things had come out differently. I spent time in those thoughts. I did not stay in them. I am someone who spent a very long time being the steady one, the patient one, the one who held things together and made excuses and chose to believe in the best version of a situation even when the evidence was pointing somewhere darker. I was loyal in a way that was not always returned. I gave consistency to people who gave me uncertainty. I planned the future for two when only one of us was actually there. And what I have learned, not easily, not quickly, but genuinely, is that love is not proved by how long you can endure its absence. Love is not loyalty if the loyalty is only ever yours. And the life you deserve is not the one you keep waiting for someone else to build with you. It is the one you finally decide to build yourself. Marcus and I are together now. I will not use this story to turn what he and I have into something cinematic because it is not cinematic. It is quiet and real and better than cinematic. He is a person who shows up in the specific ways that matter, and I have learned to recognize that for the extraordinary thing it is, rather than treating it as baseline expected behavior the way I once would have. My division is now one of the more productive parts of the firm. I have 7 people on my team. We have closed 4 major projects in 14 months. I have a corner office that overlooks a waterway, and some mornings I drink my coffee and look at the water and think about the hotel room where I sat in a dress with nowhere to go and all of this still ahead of me. I think about the 4 words Marcus said in the hallway, you do not fall. I did not know at the time whether he was right. I know now that he was not describing something he predicted. He was describing something he had already seen. He had been watching me work for 2 years and he already knew the answer. He was just telling me what he saw. I am Nadia. I am 31 years old and I have learned that the most important relationship you will ever manage is the one you have with your own clarity. Not bitterness, not revenge, clarity. The ability to see people as they are, situations as they are, and yourself as you actually are without apology and without cruelty. The chairs were full, the flowers were fresh, the dress was on, and the man was gone. And somehow in the space that opened up where a wedding had been, an entire life walked in. I would not trade it. If Nadia's story reached something real inside you, I want to hear from you. Have you ever stayed in something too long because leaving felt like admitting you had been wrong? Have you ever been the one who kept planning, kept hoping, kept arranging the future while someone else was quietly arranging theirs somewhere else? Or have you been the person who finally got to the other side and looked back and understood that what felt like an ending was actually the first honest beginning? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Nadia's story continues, and so does yours.